Hello, and welcome to Marathon Swim Stories, where we explore the human side of the superhuman feats of endurance swimmers and those who support them. I'm marathon swimmer and coach Shannon Keegan. Today, I had the distinct pleasure of hearing Bob Fernald's marathon swim story. While the late onset swimmer is a theme in marathon swimming, I don't consider his a typical story. While he dabbled in triathlon, like other runners turned triathlete, he hated the swim. Ultimately, Bob found comfort and efficiency in the water by way of Pilates. My clients will tell you I beat the posture in the water through Pilates drum. Core stability and awareness are key. So much of swimming is knowing where you are and what you're doing in the water. When is the last time you swam aware? I hope you enjoy Bob's story. Bob, what's your story?
Well, I guess thank you for the invitation to start off. I haven't listened to a lot of your guest speakers, but I gather they probably fall into a few different category types. And I would fall under the category of adult onset swimmer category, who didn't have a swim background growing up. Um, the kind of the Cliff Notes version of the story is I wanted to fish with my neighborhood buddy and work on a lobster boat. And the uh, ticket to entry was wearing one of those big orange life preservers with the three buckles. Remember those?
Mm-hmm.
And then I had to take a couple of swim lessons. And coincidentally, I found my original first American Red Cross swim lesson card from 19. I'm not going to say. I'm just not going to say. Um, and so I took the beginner, the advanced beginner, and the intermediate Red Cross classes over 2 summers. And I also took a junior lifeguard class because they were like the instructors were pushing, saying, "Oh, it's a great summer job," and so I took the course, but I never took the test because I was 15 and I didn't think or I was young, a lot younger than that at the time, and I didn't think I could work. So I pulled a no-show on the test. So then I started to work on my friend's boat. His father had a gill netting business, and the kids had a 16-foot skiff with 100 lobster traps. And so we'd haul 50 one day and haul 50 the next day. And, unfortunately, I didn't make cash, but I got paid in lobster. And so that was kind of, my youth. And, I got into high school. I was not unathletic. I played a little bit of soccer and some city league basketball. But as soon as I figured out I could make money, as a kid, I just started to do jobs, working construction, on the side under the table with friends and neighbors and stuff. So I never really continued into sports life beyond maybe a sophomore in college or a sophomore in high school, and then went to school. No sports at all.
In college.
Graduated, yeah, nothing, not even no sports offered at the place I went. So got a job with a decent company in a growing industry and got sent all over the world, and wound up in Northern California, working in Silicon Valley. And I got involved in a nonprofit to run a marathon for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society.
Mm-hmm.
And the program, you raise money, they train you, you go to, San Diego, Alaska, New York, Honolulu. We would take you to these destination places to run your first marathon, but you raise, 4 times the cost to get you there, essentially.
Mm.
So it was a really good program. And so my girlfriend's mom got sick and she passed away. And so I trained and ran in her honor. And the program was very inclusive and welcoming. And, they asked me to stay on board and mentor because they liked my interaction with other people, and soon
Mhm.
that led into a marathon coaching role, which I said, I don't understand the technical physiology, what happens part. I can talk to people, and they're like, yeah, but we can coach you and train you on the technical part, but
Mm.
we cannot train and coach technical people on the interpersonal part. You either have it or you don't.
Mm.
So I was like, fair enough. So that was my introduction to coaching. And along the way, my peer coaches, are marathon qualifier type runners.
Mhm.
Vince was a Seoul, Korea downhill ski team
Mm. Wow.
Olympian.
Mhm.
Um, and so I started hanging out with these really high caliber people, and they kind of bullied me into saying, hey, if you can run a marathon, you can do a triathlon.
Mm.
And so I said, well, you guys swim. I hear about you swimming all the time, some, program at some college, and they said, yeah, but you should come and join and try it. You can do this sprint stuff. It's really short. You got the rundown, the bike. If you have a bike, you can fake it, the story, right?
Yeah.
This is not the first original story, right? So I'm hanging out with people and that are really cool. We're all single professionals, and it was just a fun group, and I wanted to be included even more. So they said, well, why don't you come and join us for a workout? And I said, okay. What's the program? Tell me about it. And they're like, well, it's called US Masters. And I was like, no, nah, no master. There's got to be just send me to the beginner part. That's good. I'm cool with that. And so I go, I agree to go, and they say, the location is at Stanford University, and I'm like completely intimidated. And when I walk into their pavilion, and it's a beautiful sunken pavilion, very beautiful, Division I school facility. And the first three people I see are Dara Torres, Jenny Thompson, and
Oh
six-time
man.
Ironman champion Dave Scott, all like going to swim in the same pool that I'm about to swim into. I think I was like in my young 30s, so
Mhm.
it had been, 50, 20 plus years since I jumped in the water for anything um, other than a bath.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I go, and it's a 50-meter pool. It's just this gigantic, thing,
Yeah.
and, the coach kind of looks at me and tells that I'm a fish out of water because I'm wearing running shorts. Right. I've got my goggles on upside down with the labels still on the lens, and I'm looking for my friends, right? I'm looking for Vince, right? So she says, hey, I'm like, hey. And she says, this is the beginner lane. And I told her my story, and, Vince wasn't there, and everybody else, they were late. So I go into the slow lane. I swim 50 meters. And this was with the old pool with a higher deck and then a gutter below them,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
I get to the other side. Don't know how long it took me, but I puked right in the pool.
Oh man.
And I haven't told too many people on the West Coast the story unless they've seen, a video of mine or so. But, so I'm kind of cupping it into the well, and I go on to swim maybe another 20 minutes total, and I get out. And this is like a Sunday morning workout where they spend 2 hours in the pool.
Hmm.
And the coach says, how'd you do? And I'm like, this, not going to tell you I threw up or anything, but,
Right.
I tried to stick it out for a few links, and she says, well, Vince and everybody are here. Join us for coffee after over at Pete's. I'm like, okay, social part. So the master's social part took over, and I
Mm.
went back the next weekend, and I made it in, 20 minutes without throwing up. So it was progress.
Progress
And
indeed.
so, I went on to do, I think, 3 sprints, a couple of Olympics, and 3 half Ironman triathlons. And like every other triathlete, hated the swim. I just didn't feel comfortable. I didn't like the getting the snot beaten out of me. And get me on the bike, I felt better. Got me on the run, I was more in my element because I had stuck with running as I was a marathon coach, and that was my primary, outlet for exercise.
Mhm.
So I left the West Coast somewhere around 2004 and moved back to the seacoast in New Hampshire, and didn't swim, still biked. I did the what we call the Pan Mass Challenge out here. It's a 2-day, I think 184-mile event that goes from central Massachusetts all the way out to the tip of Cape Cod.
Running,
And it's
biking,
a biking. Yeah.
bike. Okay.
And it's a major cancer local, 30 million a year. Everybody does it. Um, but I didn't swim. So one winter I was, not wanting to get on the trainer, not wanting to go run outside, didn't really know about snowshoe running back then. But so I said, why don't I try to go back to the pool, see what happens? So I went to the pool and I felt like I was swimming. I felt really good. I just was like, this is crazy. And the coach in me, took over and said, this is a muscle memory thing. You got to, if it feels good, you got to do it. If it feels right. And so then after a little while longer, the coach in me took over and said, well, you ought to stop. This isn't for free. You got to drink water,
Mm.
that sort of thing. And so I stopped and it was dark out. The lifeguards had changed. And I had stopped swimming at an hour and 45 minutes.
Oh, wow.
And I was like looking over my shoulder, like, what the hell just happened? This is, it's not real. It can't be real. So I was tired in my shoulders. And I said, I probably just really did something stupid. If I were to do that running, I would pay a
Right.
price, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Somewhere. And so the next day I was fatigued and tired and heavy. I took another day off and I said, let me go back again, just see if that wasn't a fluke thing. And so I had the same feeling. Of course, I was tired, but I
Mm-hmm.
had the same feeling like I was not working in the water.
Mm.
So I'm like, wow. And so then I met these two guys in the pool, Guy Davis and Ed Gendra. They saw me swimming and they were like, hey, and they introduced themselves. This swim community is very welcoming and very open. And they're like, hey, what's your name? Where are you from? What's your story? And I'm like, well, I just moved back home. I was living on the West Coast. They're like, oh, did you swim out there? And I said, yeah. And did you do any masters swimming? And I said, yeah, I swam with Stanford Masters. And they both went, Stanford Masters. Oh my God, we got a ringer, man. We got a ringer here. And I'm like, so what do you mean ringer? And they're like, well, we do these races, like pool races.
Mm.
And they never told me about that in California, right? Probably because I was the one in the slow lane.
Yeah, that's like the elite
Right.
team or whatever. Yeah.
And Stanford, there was a lot of good athletes. They would joke on Facebook to guests that would want to come over from Europe. And they're like, hey, is there a place to swim? And they're like, yeah, we usually cruise at, 110 long course.
Right.
And it's like, and these guys, Dave Scott was there, Jenny Thompson was there.
Yeah.
It's crazy. So anyways, I told them, I said, I don't even know what pool racing is. And they're like, jumping off the blocks, and all, and I'm like,
What?
I don't know, like, well, you should join Masters. And so they convinced me and I did. And then they got me to, sign up for a couple of meets. And that, Masters camaraderie thing took over. And so I was the guy that only did one stroke style. I only did freestyle and it was long. And, I would join the workouts and feel like a fish out of water because I couldn't butterfly well. And I breaststroke, forget about it. I could fake a backstroke. And I just didn't want to do it because I liked what was happening in my freestyle. It was just, I didn't have to work. I could go forever.
Mm-hmm.
So then I started to think about taking it back out to the open water again to see how comfortable I felt. And my first foray back was we call it an ocean challenge up here, the Nubble Light Swim, which is a
Mm-hmm.
2.5 mile-ish event that John Gale has swum every single year that it's been held.
Wow.
He's one of a few people.
Awesome.
So on a wicked cold day, and I mean, it was 48-degree water, foggy. Guy, you were there, right, too, that day? Yeah. So we were looking out at the water. You couldn't see, 400 yards. There was 4-foot swell coming at you that we had to punch through. And we thought, no race, but then the fog burned and they threw us in the water. And that was and I swam without a wetsuit.
Wow.
Because I had tried putting on a wetsuit and it was like,
It's a lot of work.
I can't feel my arms. I lost everything that I had felt.
Yeah.
Right. So I jumped in and I was we're sitting at the shoreline, and I saw two other swimmers without wetsuits on. And one of them was this woman with all this ink on her legs, and and I kind of like squeeze up next to her, and I'm like, "Hey, how you doing? I'm Bob." And she goes, "Hey, I'm Elaine." I'm like, "Oh, nice
Elaine.
to meet you." I'm like, "So, is this your first open water swim?"
No.
She's like, "No, no, no." She just like strung me out, right? Just like leave me alone. I'm like, "Oh, really? Well, done this before?" She goes, "Yeah, once or twice." I'm like, "Really? What have you swum?" She's like, "Oh, the English Channel." I'm like, "Oh my God, Jesus, talking to royalty here, And this wasn't even a thought on my radar screen yet.
Mm.
So wicked cold day, 48-degree, temperature at the coldest part we call the gut, and somehow survived it, without a lot of knowledge. Elaine, helped me out. Everybody, made sure that as I was going into resonant frequency mode for shaking, that I could still carry on a conversation. And back then we just didn't know too much,
Mm.
about it because it was all new.
Mm-hmm.
So a little while later, I started to think about bigger things, and I talked to Guy, and I know one question you always ask, and guys, are my most humble training partner, and he won't believe this. He may leave the call, but when you always ask the question, who was your first inspiration about, going to do long distance swimming? And it was Guy. Guy gave me a book, and it was Marsha's book, Dover Solo.
Mm-hmm.
And I read that thing about 18 times, and it's like all
Really?
tattered, and the spine was, and I ended up losing it somehow. But I had all my notes in it. It came to the English Channel with me eventually. But that, kind of planted the seed, because I said, "Hey, I'm a marathon runner."
Yeah.
And I'm like, maybe I can run, maybe I can swim a marathon. Maybe I can swim 26.2. That would be cool.
Right.
Not
Yeah.
knowing anything.
Right. Yeah.
So guys like, yeah, so the measurements are a little different, in swimming. And he says, a marathon swim is about 10 kilometers, 6 miles. I'm like, well,
Yeah.
that doesn't seem very far, and it's not a marathon. And then he goes on to explain ultra marathons. And so, over the course of training in our, beautiful resource that's, less than a few miles away, I started to feel more confident. I says, I got to throw a goal out there.
Mm-hmm.
So after reading Marsha's book for probably the fourth time, there's contact information, for Mike Oram. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm reading along, and I'm like, so just let me send a little email, right? I'm reading along, and ding, it's like, just send me 500 pounds, and we'll get you a date. Next thing you
Wow.
know, I'm on, wiring 500 pounds. We pick a date, and now I have a date. So now
I
I've
have a
got a
goal.
goal.
Yeah.
So, but it's a couple years out, so I wanted to be pretty methodical about it. And so I did the typical, we call it the New England graduation of open water swims. You start at a 2.x mile, and then you go up to the Boston Light swim, and then you go up and see Phil White, and you
Mm-hmm.
do all of his crazy distances, and then you cruise down to see Liz and do her swim across the sound, and then
Yeah.
you do your final training for the channel. And that was kind of my progression. The swim across the sound didn't go well from a odd standpoint. We had just brutal conditions, 4 foot
Mm.
waves.
Man.
I had a sailboat for a support boat. So with no sail up, they took a pounding,
Oh.
an absolute pounding. Learned all about, you know, maybe Marcia's food delivery system, as she describes in her book, on the pole is good in some conditions,
Not.
not good
Not.
in the ocean.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, no, no. Lost a couple water bottles. It was a bad day. But I made it across, and I was getting pushed by the cutoff times the whole way, because conditions were that rough. The fleet was falling off left and right,
Wow.
and so they said, you got to get to that channel marker in 2 minutes. And I just put my head down and gave it what I had. I made it, and they said, you're good to finish. So I'm like, oh. So I slowed down, I'm like, okay, let me lengthen out. And I round the corner into the yachting area where all the marinas are. And I can see the balloons, it's 400 yards away. I'm like, sweet. All of a sudden, I swim up onto the back of my sailboat. support boat, and the ladder's down. And I look up, and there's the captain, and he says the event's over.
Oh no.
And I knew once I touched that, it was over,
Yeah.
right? And I knew that I had signed up that I have to follow the captain's orders,
Man.
right? So
Oh.
I climbed up, and on my boat was a just graduated 19-year-old emergency medical technician that was all over me like I was, you know,
Uh,
like death warmed over.
oh no.
And I was pretty fine. He took my pulse rate after a couple minutes, and he says, "Oh, that's got to be wrong." And I says, "Really? Why is that?" And he goes, "Because I'm reading 95." And I'm like, "Didn't you just graduate? Doesn't the pulse have to be a multiple of like 6, 4, right? Isn't that how you do it, right?" And so he measures me again, and my heart rate had come down. And so I didn't know what had happened until I got back to the car, and I talked to my brother, and he said, "Yeah, once you rounded the corner at that channel marker, you slowed down. That's
Oh.
why that's why I asked you how you were doing at the next feed, and your answer was better than a cancer patient." That was my
Mm.
answer, right? "I feel much better than any cancer patient. I got this." And the boat captain and the EMT, and granted, they'd been out there for 10 hours because it was that kind of day. They were like, "It's over." And they pulled me. So it
Mm.
wasn't a race decision.
Right.
It was their decision.
Yeah.
Still, I DNF'd, right?
Yeah.
Then word got around to Liz, and Liz says, "That's bullshit. They were supposed to call me. Then I was supposed to say what's going on with the swimmer and, get involved." And I just figured it was over because we were well past the 9.5 hour mark
Mm-hmm.
at that point. So that didn't go well, and I DNF'd. Next year, I go up to swim the Kingdom Swim or Medford Magog, and I make it about 15 miles, and I have a physical injury. I pop a rib head out of my back, and my
Oh.
scapula was kind of clicking. And I was 15 miles in with 10 to go, and
So you were
just
doing the
wasn't.
search.
Yeah,
The.
the search. Yeah, my
Mm-hmm.
my my shot at the search. So I had to bail because I
Yeah.
couldn't
What
do it.
year was that approximately?
2013.
Okay.
So now it's September. I'm injured. I have the channel next July, and I'm not feeling very good. I'm 3 months in rehab, and I approach January, and I'm like, you know what? I got to give it a shot. I can't
Mm-hmm.
quit now. So I was able to really build my cumulative hours per week pretty rapidly without injury, and that's the part of the story I skipped, which was all of a sudden, how I realized that I could swim efficiently was because I had been practicing Pilates for about 4 years, and
Mm-hmm.
my instructor was somebody who, had Joseph Pilates that created it. He taught 12 people, and she learned from one of the 12.
Wow.
So it was really, authentic, the classical, and very regimented and strict. And I just did what I was told because it was an
Mm-hmm.
exercise format. And so she says to me, "How do you think you got that way?" And I'm like, "I don't know." And she smacks me in the head, and she's like, "Pilates."
Mm.
And Pilates doesn't make you a automatic, better athlete. It just takes this crappy posture that I'm sitting in right now and
Mm-hmm.
makes me aware of that. And then
Mm-hmm.
I now have the ability through the part of Pilates, which is called contrology, is to sequencingly control the muscle groups to correct the posture and get them where they should be and develop the strength to hold that
Mm-hmm.
over a long period of time. But most of us will all start this way, and then we're like,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
so I just took this great posture and I put it in the water,
Yep.
and that's all it was. The rest was
Yep.
paddling, right? And then
Yep.
feeding the beast and controlling the brain. But so, anyways, that was the thing that led me to go on to, the discovery part of the story.
Mm-hmm.
So back in January, I'm starting to build the miles. I'm getting up there pretty well. I'm feeling pretty comfortable. March comes along. I had a really good heavy month, like 4, 10 or 11 hour weeks in a row.
Wow.
Um, Guy and I were doing these, or he helped me do I did 10 days of 10Ks
Wow.
in a row in early April so I could really test myself. And I broke them up from doing 1 by 10K with no breaks to 2 5Ks to, just splitting up the 2.5 hours of time. And then middle of the month, we had this crazy weird ass snowstorm and this big ass tree fell on my house and smashed my house and broke a window on my roof, a
Oh no.
skylight.
Oh
And it
no.
was snowing and raining and I was upset and angry and needed to fix it and decided I would climb up on the roof in the rain with my pajama pants on and my running shoes that weren't tied. And I slipped off the roof and landed on my foot like a ballerina on one foot.
Oh, yike.
So all of the bones in my foot right before the ankle just got dislocated. A lot of ligaments hold them together. So it's a
Mhm.
Liz Frank fracture, they call it. So I go to the doc, and Doogie Howser is my doctor, and I'm thinking like this is crazy because he's way younger than me, but he is New England's trauma orthopedic expert. So everybody goes to him. So I felt okay, and I said, he says, "Wow, ooh, sheesh, this is not great, but I can put you back together again, but we got to wait a week for the surgery because of the swelling, blah blah blah." So he goes in, he does his magic, and I'd asked him, I says, I got this little thing coming up in about 90 days, and he says, you won't be in weight bearing physical therapy in 90 days,
Mhm.
so you'll be on crutches.
Mhm.
And so he made the decision to put me in a soft boot as opposed to a hard cast so I could get back into swimming.
Yeah.
So after the surgery, a month later, being on the couch, I'm T minus 8 weeks to the channel. I go and see him, and I said, he says, "Oh, it looks great. Everything's wonderful." And I'm like, "Okay, about that swimming part, the,
Yeah.
the thing." And he goes, "Well, he goes, I can't tell you can go swim the channel."
Yeah.
And I said, "Well, I'm not looking for that. I mean, can I swim? It's non-impact."
Mhm.
And he says, "You can't do anything to ding it or bump it or thump it. You know, you can drag it, and that's it." And so, with the help of you know, Guy and a whole bunch of people, I would go to the beach. I would crutch to the water's edge. I'd hand my crutches to Guy. Guy would go take them back to the towel. I get on my hands and knees and I'd crawl out and we'd go swim for as long as I could take it because I had been out of the water for so long.
Yeah.
And so I just convinced myself, because of my pride, testosterone, male thing, that I was not going to fail in New Hampshire by quitting and not going.
Mhm.
So the longest swim I got in was probably, and I had done my qualifying swim the fall before, so I was all set there. So I got a 7.5 hour swim in a lake done as my long swim before my taper. And um, I go over to the channel, and everybody's looking at me like, once they learned I was going to be a swimmer, they're looking at me on my crutches and my boot, and they're like, "Yeah, he's one of the 60% that ain't gonna make it this year."
Oh.
And everybody's got their own channel story of the anxiety that they go through, and mine with all the drama of the foot. That aside, going through the process of getting the phone calls, being told you're going, getting a call back and says you're not going was, hard to handle, you know, and the tide was slipping. So he called up and I just said, I'm in. And they said, well, conditions don't look that great, but you said you have been in some tough conditions. If you don't want to go, we're not going to take anybody else.
Mhm.
And I said, I'm in. I'm tired of sitting in my flat. I can't go downtown. I can't walk. It was brutal. And we went. And so, I get out of the lee of England, and all of a sudden the winds kick up, and I'm in, force 3 and 4 seas with 8 foot swells.
Oh gosh.
And I just knew I had to do what you know, all I had to do was my job. The captain would do their job, the crew. And I just put my head down and turned the paddles. And I remembered what Liz Fry said to me. She said, "Don't look for France.
Mhm. Yep.
Look for France when you see it in the shallows." And
Right.
so I would always turn away from France when I fed just because I didn't want to see the light
Yeah.
7 hours away,
Right.
you
Exactly.
know.
Yeah.
And so just, struggled through it. And, I realized that, all of my goals are not going to come to fruition other than if I finish, which was the goal. My goal was to swim in an average time. I wanted to be the average kid from New Hampshire. And little did I know that there had already been a New Hampshire swimmer that swam the channel that I
Oh,
found out later on.
oh man.
And I thought I was going to be the first, and that was a big deal, because I've never done anything first.
Hmm.
So, especially in this newly found sport.
Hmm.
So ultimately, I make it to France, somehow climb the upper deck, with one foot and
With
then
one
grabbing
foot.
me and pulling me by the bathing suit. And I had just like everybody, it took on a lot of salt. I was puking, but it passed through me. Right.
Mm.
And so I had, diarrhea, and I
Mm.
had to go down 2 floors of the boat in those seas to go to the bathroom just to crawl all the way back up and then have to go back right back down again.
Oh
And it
gosh.
was just not fun. Right. It was just, that was the bad part about it.
This is the return trip back from
Yeah.
France.
All
Yeah.
the way back, And, we get back, and I remember being at the top of the gangway waiting for the car to come pick us up. And I'm hunched over on my crutches. I've got my hood over my head. And a good friend of mine that was part of my crew, John McMahon, he's a very comical character, and he's a tall guy. And so everybody watched me on the radar and on the GPS. And a group of relay team came over from an English team, and they go right up to John, and they're like, "Brilliant swim, mate! Unbelievable in phosphor conditions. How you feeling, mate?" And he goes, "I'm feeling great, man. I passed out for the first 2 hours. I slept. I took two Dramamine." And then he goes, "Why don't you go talk to the guy that swam over there?" And they're like, "And Jesus, she's wearing braces and all this." And it was just like crazy. And then the next day, everybody comes, as I'm downtown, going for coffee, and everybody's like, everybody knew it was me because I'm the only guy on crutches. And so everybody came up and was very, welcoming and said congratulations. But I thought it was a damn fluke because,
Mm.
my time was better than average, which was crazy for the conditions.
Hmm.
And I felt like I could have went down to Dover Harbor and swum back and forth for a
Back.
while.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to be that American, right? Hey, swim the channel, come down, he's, rubbing it in. So, I just enjoyed it, and tried to do a little sightseeing. But I did think it was a fluke. And somebody introduced the concept of the Triple Crown to me. And I'm like,
Hmm.
well, I mean, I just learned so much about myself in England. Nothing, bring it,
Yeah.
whatever's next, I can take.
Right.
After throwing up and having, you know, intestinal problems and 8-foot swells and a broken foot. So I signed up for New York. And again, goal being wanting to be the average time. And this was under the MIMS flag back
Hmm.
then. And a lot of trauma there. You send your money in, you don't hear anything except, 2 days before you go. And all the people that went ahead of you were calling you from England asking me to drive down to see if there's lights on in the office, not knowing where New Hampshire is compared to New York City. So, and New York was a great swim. It was fast, obviously. I My stroke style kind of blew away the calculation of how long it would take me.
Hmm.
So when I started in the East River and came around the Hudson, the race director was on my boat, and there was only one other guy in the water, Rohan's Moray. We all know. I met him in England. He was staying with me and went out a few days after I did.
Hmm.
And I was supposed to meet Rohan's around Battery Park so that we could go through the ferry part together, and not be too much of a disruption. I somehow got to the Hudson pretty quickly, and the race director says you need to cut your speed back by like 50%.
Oh wow.
He said, you are so far ahead of schedule, you're going to get to Battery Park an hour ahead of the the tide change.
Oh,
It means
wow.
you're going to swim down to Governor's Island and you're going to tread water for an hour
Oh, man.
until you can jump back in the flow and head east because you're not going to turn the corner, you know.
Wow.
So they took me out of the deep part of the Hudson and they left Rohan's in the main flow. And so my vision, my view of the Intrepid was like this because I was that close. The other thing that was a bummer was I was that close to the garbage piers.
Right. Right.
But we got to Battery, had to pull over into Brooklyn for a little while just to hang out for like 10 or 15 minutes for the current to change, and then we jumped back in and um, had a good finish. It was great. So then Catalina comes up next, and I'm like, okay, I'm feeling pretty seasoned, like I belong in this community. You know, I've done two of the big things. I've been lucky that they both happened, and without incident, unlike Renfrew Magog and SAS. So maybe that's good. I'm lucky. We set up for Catalina. My training then was a little bit less from a volume standpoint probably because I knew I could take whatever was going to be thrown at me from an ocean standpoint, and then I just
Mhm.
knew that I could just mentally overtake it. I felt
Mhm.
that confident. So we get out there, and I guess along the way, I get set up with two kayakers. One's an ocean researcher, lives on Catalina. Another guy's paddled 5 or 6 times. Um, Probably 20 days out, I get a call that the ocean researcher can't paddle for me.
Oh, no.
The other guy says, "I'll do it all myself, no problem." I'm like, okay, cool, because Margaret did that for me in New York. She did the whole thing. So professional kayakers could probably do that, right? So I'm in my hotel. It's T minus 48 hours before I go out, and I get a call from somebody at the Federation that says, "Hey, heard you had some problems with your kayak, but you're all set with the guy." And they said, "We just wanted to let you know in full disclosure that this guy's riding a new kayak. He's capsized it a couple times. He's ran into the power boat.
Oh, no.
He says he has swum the channel, but he has been in the channel, hasn't made it." And I'm like, great, this is exactly what I need. And
Right.
they're like, so I says, "You're really going to call me up 48 hours as an experienced open water swimmer, and you're going to dump this on me?
Mm.
I mean, you should have just not told me, right? I should have just dealt with it." So now my anxieties, they said, "Well, if you need help getting another kayaker," and I'm like, yeah, I need help getting another kayaker. So they got another kayaker, and that was great because they split the way. Um, and halfway through the night, probably 4 hours in, I stop for fuel, and they tell me that the kayak's Mirage Drive thing is all fouled up
Oh, no.
and tied up with rope or seaweed or something. And they said, "We got to haul it up on the swim deck of the boat and the bottom scratcher, and we got to fix it." It's pitch black out. You can't see California, and I'm like,
Yeah.
you know, I'm not going to sit here. I'm
Right.
not. So I just said, "Which way?" And they said, "Just follow the heading of the boat." And I said, "I'm going." And so I just took off, and I said, "Whatever's going to happen is going to happen," but I was not going to let it happen sitting there.
Yeah.
And so I just went off, and it got really dark really fast without those lights around, and
Yeah.
it was the most surreal experience. It was really cool. And
Yeah.
then the powerboat caught up, and then the kayaker caught up, and then we made it to shore, and I'm like, I the shore finish was thrashed on the rocky shore, and I got all cut open, from hitting the rocks in 3 or 4 places, and I can see myself bleeding and looking at the bottom scratcher that looks like it's about a mile away, and I have to swim bleeding
Right.
in known shark infested waters. That is my biggest fear. Ringing the dinner bell, right? And all I could think of was my friend John McMahon was with me, and they said, "Go for the guy in the wetsuit. Go for the guy in the wetsuit. Don't take the one that's bloated and white, from his swim." And so I ended up, becoming the only person from New Hampshire at the, still, I guess, that did the Triple Crown.
Nice.
And after that, life really changed because, people started to ask me to do the typical public speaking. And along the way, a lot of people asked me to help them with swimming. And I figured out I could do clinics as fundraisers, for a couple of local causes, and started to get more into coaching. And what I realized was that, having been at Masters, and I think all the Masters coaches are great, but I have a challenge with folks that just kind of sit up on the deck and they say, you need to this. And I'm like, I'm doing that. I'm Michael Phelps over here,
Right.
and they're like, you need to do it. But so I'm obviously, not doing it. And so what I realized is that I would tell people that, hey, you're not doing it. And they're like, here's the video that shows it. Let's get out of the water and see if we can do it. And then I just realized that over time, I just started to incorporate, more of the core awareness and Pilates into my coaching because it's what worked, and
Hmm.
it's what helped me figure out the body position. The
Hmm.
rest is a good catch and turnover.
Right.
And so, my local, somebody nominated me for a TED Talk, a TEDx talk,
Wow.
and I did that. And I've got a whole group of friends that are these crazy endurance people that, ice climb, they ski down, the back bowls of remote teleskiing, all this stuff,
Hmm.
marathon
Yeah.
runners, Ironman triathletes. And one guy decided to have the idea to create a movie about us and submit it to the film festival, all of us that give back to charity.
Hmm.
So one of our buddies is a producer kind of guy, and so they start doing things, and I submit what little film and photographs I had because I didn't really do this for any other purpose than myself. And he interviewed me, and we did some swimming, in the local river and stuff like that. And so he asked me to come over to do voiceover work. And so I said, how's the film coming? Can I see Andrea's part of her skiing down this Tuckerman's Ravine out here, which is really cool?
Hmm.
Like, well, the movie kind of changed. And I'm like, how did that, what do you mean? And he says, well, you're the best story for the movie. So we're just going to do the movie about you. And my friends made this movie about this thing we called an allegedly good swimmer, because all of a sudden people are like, wow, you're, on this list of, the Triple Crown list is pretty short.
Yeah.
And, the crazy part of it was the humble beginnings I had of no swimming to figuring this out
Hmm.
led to the Triple Crown. And after that August, there was a thing on the MSF that says, who swum the Triple Crown the fastest if you combine their times.
Hmm.
And so there was this, kind of like, oh, it's so and so, it's Liz, it's Trent. People are guessing back and forth, and the list starts going, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it's all the people that we know, right? And they're like 7, 8, 9, and it's all the people that we know. And they're like, who's number 10? I'm like, everybody I know is on the list, and they're like, Bob Fernald. And I'm like, what? No, no, there's just no chance. And my 3 combined times put me there, but that lasted like a half a season because the next swimmer,
Right. Yeah.
totally.
There's so many now.
But it was really like a strange thing, and that's why I kind of do so much to try to give back. Guy and I, when he was, helping me by being on my side most of the time in all of our trainings, there was 2 or 3 of us that would go to these swims, and that was once or twice a week. Now we have 9 swims a week with at least 8 to sometimes 20 people.
Wow. That's great.
And it's in this whole community that's come out of this triathlete and open water swimming has been, the best part of the journey is meeting all these people that are trying to overcome, a challenge and get in the open water. And that's, people ask me, can I help them? And I'm like, I wish I could, you know, put it in a liquid and give it to you as a serum because it's
Right.
so freaking cool what I'm able to do in the water. And without any effort means I enjoy it more.
Hmm.
And that's kind of the probably the Bob Cliff Notes story that these
What,
guys have all heard.
right. Yeah. What did you find any kind of carryovers from, I guess, because especially I'm thinking like the mental part from marathon swimming when you, or excuse me, from marathon running into marathon swimming, or when did you have to kind of expand your mind to really get around the mental stuff?
So in marathon running, the only mental part of training was being stupid enough to sign up to do it. And I never, I was an okay, marathon runner, not a Boston qualifier level at all, and I only ran 3 of them.
Hmm.
Um, so I never really got to the point where I did in swimming where I had the proficiency
Okay.
of the ability. It
Hmm.
was painful every damn time. And a lot of times because of the coaching I did, I probably saw 800 people across the finish line over the course of 5 or 6 years. And that was so rewarding, singing Warren Zevon's Werewolves of London in the last 0.2 miles to somebody who's literally running on their elbows trying to
Mm.
cross a finish line. I mean, it's just, it's good stuff, right? And so I don't think there was much mental for me, but one mental part of the training that I think, or part of the process, let's say that I talk about is, I think we're all on the bell curve of ADHD, right? Somewhere,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I wonder if I have, and the people that can do this, us people, if we have more channels to switch to when we're in the middle of doing this,
Hmm.
because people will say, well, what did you think of? And
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
and I'm like, you know, I thought of my stroke, every single
Right.
stroke, all 37,000 of them,
Yeah.
because I didn't want to take 38,000 of them.
Right.
And then I'm like, well, I probably didn't think about my stroke the whole time.
Right.
I remember thinking about the Red Sox at one point, wondering if they were winning. But, I go back and I'm trying to relive that. And so much happened all at once with the conditions. And I was like, I I'm not sure I had maybe a couple of mantras, but it was all in and out. And that's what I mean by the channels.
Hmm.
I was able to go, oh, there's a jellyfish. Oh, pull the belly in,
Yeah.
that sort of thing. So I
Right.
kept myself distracted with my distractions.
Hmm.
But I would always go back to the stroke as soon as I knew I was distracted. It was like right back there to, powerful, streamline stroke, as best
Hmm.
I can.
Yeah.
So wasn't much carryover for marathoning.
Right, right. Okay. Well, that I guess to be fair, I should have asked the question about swimming. What was did you have any hard parts in that first? I mean, obviously you had the conditions and, you had the broken foot, but you were certain you were going to get to France. Was there anything that you like, I don't know, unexpected, any hard part that you had to get through?
Um, 2 parts. One was I got stuck in a washing machine,
Mm.
conjure of water where you
Hmm.
can take a look at the notes from my swimming. You can see my speed go whoop.
Yeah.
And it's like I'm fighting through it, and I knew it because the water was just in my face like this, and so that was brutal because I didn't think I was ever going to pull through it. I didn't know how long it was, you
Hmm.
know. And then I took on so much salt water that I puked a lot,
Yeah.
and I was proud, So I'm taking a breath, and I put my head down. I'm like, and I'm like, didn't want the crew to worry about me, right?
Right.
You know, little did I know they could see the vapor trail from 8 foot above me, coming out as my exhaust, and they just kept pressing the fluids, and I used infinite fuel,
Hmm.
and I just kept making sure I knew what was going out of me, and I knew I had to drink more in order to compensate for it.
Hmm.
But fortunately, I didn't get a weird electrolyte imbalance where I had any nausea or anything beyond the nausea, like
Yeah.
any equilibrium issues or anything like that. So,
Yeah.
but those were the 2 things I didn't expect. You know, maybe I didn't expect a mini tanker to be about 200 meters from me.
Right.
I thought we might not have a near miss like that. Like I
Wow.
I got no warning, and I look up and I'm like, Did you see that? That's close, you know? And they're like, yeah, put your head down, let's keep moving, right? So those were the two things I didn't really expect was the vomiting and the standstill swimming.
Yeah, right. How did it how do you describe the feeling of completing one of these big marathon swims?
Completing it or in the middle of it,
Completing it.
the English Channel was like, I can't believe, that this is, really happening. And when I made it to my last feed, the captain, and it was Mike Orem, his son, that was the captain that day for me. He opened up a slider and he says, "How you feeling?" And I said, like I've been shot at and missed and shit at and hit, to be honest with you. And he says, "Well," he goes, "This is your last feed." And I look behind the boat and I can see the lighthouse. It's up there.
Yeah,
It's not there. It's like right there. And I'm
right.
like,
Wow.
oh, I got this. I got this. Right. So I'm thinking I have a half an hour. So I take off. Right. They're trying to drop a dinghy in the water.
Mm.
Right. So now the boat swimmer separates self from boat, goes in the wrong direction than they wanted me to go. So I get swept around the south part of the cap by the tidal change,
Mhm.
and then the dinghy caught up to me. And when I got to shore and I crawled up, and I didn't do anything ceremoniously. I didn't even know about the cool thing about grabbing a rock and bringing it back.
Right.
I just like leaned up against this mossy green rock, for a minute, and I just see the captain or the dinghy pilot saying, "Come on, come on," and he's up there going like this because the waves are crazy, and I can't get in the dinghy because it's too rough, and he's
Mm.
like, "You're gonna have to swim to the boat." So when I was on shore, I had a different feeling than when I was back on the boat,
Right.
because it was more exhaustion. I'm done. And then when I was back on the boat, it's like, it's really over. I really did it. I'm on my
Mm.
way back. And it's not because I got pulled.
Right.
So the feeling was like, wow, that was tough. And then the captain came up and he shook my hand and he says, he goes, two things. He says, that was one of the best swims I've seen in rough conditions like that. He goes, you just kept at it. You kept doing your job. Thank you for that. And he goes, and I get to make it home before my dad for high tea. And so he's like calling his dad on the radio, who's still out there with the other swimmer that decided not to turn back. And he's like, looks like, what's wrong? Is something wrong with your boat over there? So anyways, long story short is that, it was a different feeling of knowing that I had done something very difficult, and that really built my confidence. And Guy knows this. We're the only two freaks, maybe with DJ, and John does this up in Maine. And we're dragging Cheryl into the dark side of going out into post-hurricane conditions as they come through New England, but very safely.
Mhm.
And we are all convinced that we are much better channel swimmers that go to the channel because of the conditions that Gulf of Maine affords us in temperature
Mhm.
and conditions.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, for sure.
I feel bad for all the people that come from Kansas and you know,
Right.
can swim 10, 12, 13 hours without a
Yeah.
problem, but then they go in and ingest salt for 13 hours.
Right. Yep. Yeah.
So
It's a challenge. What made you want to keep doing this marathon thing? So after all of your puking and intestinal issues, and what made you want to do another one?
because I felt like I could have come back, and the next day it's like, okay, so I'm just tired.
Hmm.
And that was my longest swim I had ever done time wise. But I felt like if they had asked me for something more, I knew I could have gone on, but I didn't know what that was
Hmm.
yet. But I knew that I had more in me. So more in me led to that I have to prove that it's not a fluke. And that's where New York and the Triple Crown came from. It was like, okay, the whole drama of, oh, New England kid who's only taken 3 swim lessons, breaks his foot and goes and conquers the channel.
Right.
It's like, that's just, it's a dramatic story, 10
Right.
foot seas, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah, so I made it, but it wasn't a one-off
Mm-hmm.
because those
Mm-hmm.
things happen. And I had to prove to myself that, it wasn't. And I remember on the bottom scratcher, the captain, I forget his name off the top of my head, the crusty old guy with the beard, he's like, what we do is dangerous. And he goes, and we've got, it's going to be rough out there. And my friend John says, yeah, you should have seen him in the channel because we didn't see him very often because there would be a wave in between the two of us. And I knew that no matter what they threw, whatever the Pacific would throw at me, I could handle. And
Mm-hmm.
I felt really comfortable with having my ass handed to me in the English Channel, and that, you know, didn't make a cocky impression, made a confident impression
Mm-hmm.
because we still analyze the water every single time we jump into it as to what we're getting into
Mm-hmm.
uh, to be safe. And so, like I said, I feel like this thing hit me in the chest, this ability, and I didn't develop it over several decades.
Right.
It was a gift through Pilates, and I'm just sharing it.
Yeah.
That's all I'm
Yeah.
doing. So,
What have you learned about yourself through marathon swimming?
that I can take more than I thought I could. I mean, it was, I didn't understand it at the time until people came back and they said, yeah, they don't send boats out, unless you're a relay at beyond force two. If you're solo, they prefer 2.5 and below. They took you out knowing it was going to be three. And I'm like, so what is that? And I looked it up and I'm like, yeah, I can remember not seeing the boat, because it was, they would disappear behind the wave. And I only have one short video clip of me in the water, essentially, and the rest are still photographs. But it was a pretty impressive shot of me disappearing over the backside of a wave, and um, the captain saying, "Look at that one coming up on him! Look at that!" And I was like, "Gosh, even the captain thinks it's impressive." But I didn't know any of that until after the fact.
Right.
So it taught me that, you know, I could handle a lot, not only in swimming, but also in the business world. It's in my professional life. It's like I don't get worked up as much. It's like, yeah,
Right.
it's just another 8 foot swell. It's just another mouthful of salt water.
Right. Yeah. How do you teach that to people? That kind of that ability to just go with the flow.
It's hard.
I think it's I can't decide if it's just something some people have and some people don't, or if it's something that can be taught. You know.
Yeah, I don't know, but if I always say my mission is to share my joy or what I've learned with everybody I can before I leave
Hmm.
this place. And it's a really cool thing. It's a really cool thing that we get to do right here,
Yeah.
right? We've got a great resource both in the lakes and in the ocean.
Yeah. Who's inspired you?
So I mentioned Guy.
Hmm.
He got me into this, and I was very happy when he decided to uh, commit to the channel because I had been asking and pushing and prodding and maybe doing some of this retaliatory bullying after, like what happened to me out at Stanford. And eventually he came around, and so I was really excited about that. Um, on the day I finished the channel was my mom's birthday anniversary,
Mm.
and she had passed many years ahead of time, and so had my father. And one of the channels that I, switched to is my family. And so my mom and my dad never got to see this part of me because I
Yeah.
was just after I graduated from college that they passed away.
Goodness.
They never got to see what I did in my work life.
Hmm.
And so um, there was a lot of times that uh, in all of my events where, I'd be coming up on a feed and I've had to like, okay, wipe my eyes because I'm crying in my goggles going through
Hmm.
that channel of remember my family. But my mom and dad were a big inspiration because I'm just kind of doing it for me, but it's, something they would be proud of.
Yeah, absolutely. That's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing your story, Bob. I love it.
Yeah. Thank you too. This is a great thing you do, as I said before. I
I
think,
love doing it.
yeah, it's a
It's
great
fun.
resource.
I can't stop. There's too many fun people to talk
How
to.
many episodes?
I think you're 99 of
199?
interviews. Yeah, I've had 100 like episodes. A couple of them are just me chit chattering away, but this is
All
my
right.
99th
Well, keep
interview.
it up.
I will.
Keep it up.
I will.
Well,
All
thank you
righty, you
guys.
guys.
Thanks
Yeah.
to my swimming training partners
I can't wait to
for the
come
moral
visit you
support.
guys somehow, some way. I'm gonna come swim with you.
And likewise,
Yeah, if
we
you're
should
ever out
send
north.
a guy. Is DJ's house out there close to where Shannon is?
I'm not exactly sure. I mean, it's where all these gnarly kite surfers go.
Oh, must
The
be in
big,
the he must be in the Columbia, which is up
Yeah,
by Portland, closer to Portland.
yeah. I mean, I'm
Others.
not exactly, but he's out there regularly in the summer. Um, I'm not quite sure what his plans are this year, but I expect I'll do the same thing. Yeah, no. I mean, he's such a great adventurer. You're always going to find him,
That's
in those
awesome.
places where there's adventure. Yeah.
yeah.
I
And
love it.
everyone should come and swim with us in
Yeah.
post-hurricane conditions. It's the most fun you can have as a swimmer. It is just awesome.
It sounds like it'd be a hard thing to plan to get there post hurricane, but
I guess so. I guess so.
Yeah.
I need to be swimming part time on the East Coast or living part time on the East Coast, which
I
the way
think
our
we need
droughts
to
are,
get
it's
in.
possible.
If we pooled our resource and bought like a small community swim place at like the destined locations, like,
Mm,
everybody should go train in San Francisco. Everybody should train in Florida. Everybody should train in New England. Everybody should train in Seattle or something like that.
yeah.
And just say, hey, you know what? There's 10 of us together. We all kind of have these little locations, let's call them,
Hmm.
and, share the wealth,
Absolutely. Yeah.
love that. Love that.
Yeah, for sure. We have a big lake down, well, reservoir, in Northern California. So it's only like 2 hours from where I'm at in Southern Oregon. But I really want to host a camp there because it's surprisingly warm, like in April.
Hmm.
Anyway, and that like houseboats are prevalent because it's so big. It's
Yeah.
like
Which reservoir?
Lake Shasta. It's called
Oh
Lake
yeah.
Shasta. Yeah, I
Yeah.
was gonna do that. Last year, I had a whole crew set up to go and had to cancel everything, but anyway, it's
Yeah,
gonna
COVID
happen.
was, yeah. No, I think it's a wonderful idea and wonderful venue, and it's a great time of year to get people
Yeah, that's
going.
more than anything. I feel like you all on the East
Yeah,
Coast would maybe want to come out here and have some like respectable, 59,
Temperatures.
62-degree water, right?
It's
exactly. I
still
mean,
cold here.
that's exactly what you need on the plan to be able to
Yeah,
get in and do some good distance in kind of April and make a
exactly.
jump on the whole summer training
Yep.
plan.
Yep. So stay in tune. And the only thing is we're running out of water out here is the problem. So our
Yeah.
reservoirs are about 20%, or I guess down there they're at 48, 50, but still it's so low. We need the water.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
supposed to get rain this weekend. We need it desperately. The ground's cracked and dry. It was 80 this last week.
Oh man.
I mean, I don't want to complain, but it's really when your reservoir's at 25 in April, like I don't know where we're gonna
Yeah.
be. We're gonna have no water by August. So I'm
Right.
planning to be out your way.
Come on out.
Yeah.
Plenty of places to stay.
Yeah. All right, you
Well,
guys have a
thanks
great
again,
one.
Shannon. I
Yeah, you
appreciate
bet.
it.
All right, I'll talk
All
to you all
right.
later.
See you guys in the
Bye.
water 5:30 at Kingston tonight.
Love
5:30
it.
at the park entrance.
I'm gonna fly out.
All right, we'll see you
Bye.
later.
Great job,
Bye.
Bob. Thanks.
I hope you enjoyed today's interview. Do you want to take Marathon Swim Stories with you? Subscribe on your favorite podcast provider. Want to connect with like-minded limit pushers? Join us for Marathon Swim Stories live on Tuesdays at 5:30 a.m. Pacific, 8:30 Eastern, 13:30 GMT. Thanks for watching.